The rain falls steadily, tapping against the ground and leaves, blending with the distant rumble of thunder. At first, the sound feels calming, like it's wrapping you in safety. But as the night goes on, that sense of comfort starts to fade. Camping in the woods during a rainstorm, it's supposed to be peaceful. You're surrounded by nature, far from everything. But what if being far away doesn't make you feel safe? What if it makes you feel vulnerable? Rain has a way of hiding things. It muffles your footsteps, your breathing, even the noises you don't want to hear. The storm becomes part of the night, masking everything else. But what if the storm wasn't the only thing keeping you awake? What if, inside your tent, you started to sense that something else was out there, hidden in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to make itself known? Tonight, I'll share stories of those who thought they were safe in the woods, surrounded by the sound of the rain. Stories of isolation, where the darkness seemed to creep closer than anyone could imagine. Of encounters that can't be explained, leaving behind questions no one can answer. And of things so unexplainable, you'll wonder if the woods are ever truly empty. So, sit back, listen carefully, and try not to let your imagination get the better of you. Stay with me until the end. The last story, well, it's one you'll wish you hadn't heard, but I'll leave that for later. For now, don't forget to like this video, comment, and subscribe for more tales you'll wish weren't true. And as the rain continues to fall, let's begin. I decided to camp alone for the first time, a decision I've regretted every day since. It wasn't some grand adventure or a break from reality. I just needed to get away, to breathe, to clear my head. At first, it felt right. The rain was light, tapping on the tent like a soft reminder that I was far from everything and everyone. But as the hours crept by, the feeling shifted. The night didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt heavy. The rain pounded harder, masking most of the other sounds. But the scratching didn't stop. It moved. First to one side of the tent, then to the back. My flashlight sat within reach, but I couldn't bring myself to grab it. What was I supposed to do? Shine it out and confirm I wasn't alone? I wanted to believe I was imagining it. Then, lightning struck. For a split second, the tent lit up, and I saw it. A shadow. It wasn't clear, just a blurred outline, but it was there. Standing, still, watching. Oh, my stomach dropped. I froze, gripping my sleeping bag as if it would protect me. Then came another flash of lightning. The shadow was still there, but it was closer. Its shape didn't make sense. It looked human, but it wasn't. Its arms hung too low, and its head tilted at an angle that made me feel sick. And then the scratching stopped. My ears rang from the stillness that followed. It wasn't the kind of calm you find in peace. It was suffocating. I sat there, staring at the tent wall, waiting for something to happen. And then it did. A scream tore through the air. It wasn't mine. It wasn't human. It was shrill and raw. The sound that doesn't leave your mind no matter how much time passes. My body moved before my brain could catch up. I unzipped the tent and shined the flashlight into the rain. My heart racing so fast it hurt. There was nothing, just the rain hammering down and the wind ripping through the trees. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined the shadows standing just outside the tent, waiting. When the sun finally rose, I stepped out, shaky and exhausted. I tried to convince myself it had all been in my head. Maybe the storm played tricks on me. But when I turned to pack up the tent, I saw them. Claw marks. Deep, jagged cuts that ran across the fabric. Too precise to be caused by the weather. And then, just a few feet away, I saw the handprint, pressed into the mud, impossibly large, with fingers that stretched far too long. I didn't stop to think. I grabbed my things and ran. I didn't even look back. I haven't camped since. I haven't even stepped foot in the woods. People ask me what I think happened that night, what I saw. I always say the same thing. I don't know, but the truth, I do. I just don't have the words to explain it. And honestly, I don't want to. Some things are better left unanswered. Camping with friends is supposed to feel safe, right? You've got people around you, laughter, and the reassurance that no matter what happens, you're not alone. That's what we thought too. But that night, sitting around the campfire during the rainstorm, I realized something. Sometimes, being surrounded by people doesn't protect you. Sometimes, it's what makes things even worse. There were 4 of us, me, Adam, Lisa, and Jake. The trip had been Lisa's idea. She thought it would be fun to camp during the rain. She said the sound of the storm would make everything feel more adventurous. And honestly, it did at first. The fire crackled, the rain dripped from the edges of our tarp, and the trees swayed in the wind. It was the perfect setup for stories. At least, that's what we thought. Lisa loved ghost stories, and of course, we indulged her. We took turns trying to scare each other, making up tales of haunted cabins and creatures lurking just beyond the tree line. Adam was the best storyteller among us. He could draw you in with every word, make you forget he was making it all up. But just as he was finishing his story, Jake stood up. He said he had to use the restroom, like it was no big deal. We waited, joking about how Jake was probably spooked by Adam's story and was stalling to avoid admitting it. But then time stretched. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Lisa frowned, her voice cutting through the sound of the rain. "Where is he?" she asked. I grabbed my flashlight, calling out into the dark. "Jake, are you good?" But nothing came back, just the sound of water dripping off the leaves. Adam brushed it off, saying Jake had probably wandered a little too far and would find his way back. But Lisa wasn't convinced, and honestly, neither was I. The woods felt different. The rain wasn't helping, and the longer we sat there, the more the unease grew. Still, we told ourselves he'd be fine. He had his phone, right? Then, just as I was about to suggest we go looking for him, I saw it. Movement at the edge of the firelight. A figure stepped forward, slowly, almost cautiously. It was Jake, or at least it looked like Jake. He was soaked, water streaming from his hair and jacket. He didn't say anything, just walked over and sat down by the fire. But something wasn't right. He didn't look at us, not once. Just sat there, staring at the flames. "Jake, you okay?" I asked, my voice louder than I intended. No answer. He didn't flinch, didn't even blink. Lisa reached out, her hand trembling slightly, but Adam grabbed her arm. "Don't," he said firmly. His tone made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Adam's eyes never left Jake. "That's not him," she said quietly. Lisa looked at me, her expression somewhere between fear and disbelief. "What do you mean?" she whispered. But before Adam could respond, Jake stood up, slowly. Without a word, he turned and walked back into the trees, disappearing into the rain. We sat there, frozen, until Lisa broke the tension. "We have to find him," she said, grabbing her flashlight. Adam and I hesitated, but eventually we followed her into the rain. The water was coming down harder now, making it nearly impossible to see. We called Jake's name again and again, our voices swallowed up by the storm. And then we found him. He was huddled under a tree, his arms wrapped tightly around himself. His face was pale, his eyes wide and unfocused. I got lost," he mumbled. His voice cracked as he spoke. "I've been trying to find my way back for hours." I stared at him, the flashlight shaking in my hand. If Jake was here, who or what had been at the campfire? I think we can all recognize that figure every time we return to the campsite, every time we return to the campsite, every time we return to the campsite. Everything seemed normal at first. The fire was still going, the rain hissing as it hit the flames. But then Adam froze. "Look," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't moving, but I could feel it, watching us. Its face was hidden, but it didn't need to move for us to know it wasn't Jake. It never was. We didn't stay to find out what it wanted. We packed what we could and left, leaving the fire burning behind us. To this day, I don't know what was out there, and I don't want to know. People still ask me if I'd ever go camping again. I always laugh and say no, but it's not because I don't like the woods anymore. It's because I know what's waiting there. The forest is alive in more ways than you can imagine. That's what my boyfriend Ethan always used to say. He loved the woods, the way the trees towered over you, how the air felt heavier, untouched by the chaos of cities. He believed the forest had a soul, something ancient and untamed. I used to laugh when he said it, brushing it off as one of his quirks, but after that night, I stopped laughing. Because I know now he was right. We had set up camp deep in the wilderness, far from any trail or sign of civilization. Ethan wanted the full experience, just us, the trees, and the storm that had been threatening all day. By the time the rain began, we were already tucked into our tent, our gear piled against one side to keep it dry. The sound of the rain was comforting at first, the way it pattered on the fabric above us, blending with the distant rumble of thunder. I felt safe, wrapped in my sleeping bag with Ethan beside me. After hours, that comfort faded. It started with a sound, low and steady, almost like breathing. At first I thought it was the wind, but the rain wasn't letting up and the trees weren't moving. The sound didn't rise or fall. It stayed constant, like someone exhaling slowly, over and over. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was nothing, but Ethan noticed too. He sat up, his silhouette barely visible in the dim glow of the flashlight we'd left on. "Do you hear that?" he asked. I nodded, my throat tightening. The breathing sound grew louder, closer. Then the tent shook. It wasn't a strong shake, just enough to make the fabric ripple. Ethan grabbed the flashlight, unzipped the tent slightly, and shined the light outside. "It's probably just a branch or something," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Outside, the rain fell in thick sheets, making it hard to see anything beyond a few feet. He zipped the tent back up and sat there, clutching the flashlight like it was a lifeline. Minutes passed, maybe hours. I don't know. Time felt strange in that moment. The rain kept falling, the breathing sounds continued, and the tent trembled every so often, like something was brushing against it. I wanted to speak, to say anything, but the words wouldn't come. I was too afraid of what might happen if I made a sound. Then it happened. The tent shook violently, like something had hit it with full force. Ethan scrambled to unzip it again, but before he could, we saw it. The walls of the tent lit up as lightning flashed, and there, through the thin fabric, we saw the shadows. They were tall and twisted, their movements jerky, unnatural. Ethan froze, his hand gripping mine so tightly it hurt. "That's not the wind," he whispered. Another flash of lightning came. and that's when we saw the trees. They were moving, but not swaying like they do in the breeze. They lurched, their branches twisting and contorting like arms. The breathing sound was louder now, almost deafening. And then I saw it, one of the trees, in the bark. For just a moment, there was a face, not carved or shaped by nature, but real. Its eyes stared straight at me, unblinking, before disappearing into the knots of the wood. Ethan yanked me up, pulling me out of the tent into the rain. "We have to go," he shouted, his voice almost lost in the storm. I stumbled after him, the mud sucking at my boots, the flashlight beam shaking as he ran ahead of me. But no matter how far we ran, it felt like the trees were closing in. Their movements faster, more erratic. The breathing sound followed us, growing louder and louder, until it was all I could hear. I don't remember much after that. I remember running, tripping over roots, and Ethan screaming my name. Then, nothing. When I woke up, it was daylight, and I was lying on the ground, soaked and covered in mud. Ethan was next to me, his face pale, his eyes hollow. A rescue team was standing over us, their voices blurred as they asked us what had happened. They told us we were miles from where our campsite had been, in a part of the woods that wasn't even on the map. Ethan never talks about that night. I tried asking him once, but he just shook his head and walked away. As for me, I can't forget it. I can't forget the breathing, the trees, or the face in the bark. And sometimes, late at night, when it rains, I swear I can still hear it, low, steady, and far too close. Camping is meant to be an escape, a chance to step away from the noise of everyday life and find some peace. But as you've heard tonight, that peace doesn't always happen. Sometimes the woods hold things we're not meant to see or survive. Think back to the first story, where the simple act of camping alone turned into a nightmare. The shadow outside the tent wasn't only unsettling, it was impossible to explain. The claw marks left behind and the handprint that defied all logic made it clear the camper wasn't alone. And honestly, what could have been out there is something no one should ever have to imagine. Then there was the second story. The campfire was supposed to be a safe space for friends to laugh and share ghost stories. But when Jake disappeared and something or someone that looked exactly like him came back instead, the line between safety and danger blurred completely. The moment they realized it wasn't Jake at the fire was terrifying enough, but seeing that figure soaked and still, watching them from the trees, that's something they'll never forget. And finally, the third story. The woods aren't supposed to move, and trees shouldn't feel alive. But for that couple, the forest became something much more than just a place. The breathing sounds, the face in the bark, and the way the trees seemed to close in on them, it all defied explanation. And when they were found miles from their campsite, with no memory of how they got there, it left a question that none of us can answer. What did the forest want? And how did it let them go? Camping might seem peaceful, but sometimes it brings you closer to things you wish you'd never encountered. So, which story haunted you the most? Was it the shadow in the tent, the imposter by the fire, or the forest that breathed? Let me know in the comments below. And if you're brave enough, share your own camping horror stories. Who knows? Maybe your story will be the next one I tell. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more chilling content. Until next time, stay safe.